I have to be slightly careful with what I'm drinking. I once did an episode where I just did a book review on my own once, and I had this chocolate milk, and it was really nice, relaxing chocolate milk. So I'd have a sip every occasionally, and then my voice would just like drop an octave when I did that, and then over the next 5 minutes, it would just gradually go back again. So this is like, at the beginning, it's like, hi. Then like it would just go off again over the next 5 minutes. So I have to be slightly aware of that now, to not make it sound completely like there's 3 people speaking. Okay, so I guess today we're talking about postdoc fellowships. I am joined for the second time on this podcast now by Toby Wise. So thank you for doing this, Toby.
Thank you.
So I guess I already had one episode that's kind of similar to this, which was with Matthias Stange, who's a postdoc at UCLA. And we kind of talked for about 50 minutes about how he got his postdoc position. And he got his through basically emailing potential supervisors out of the blue and saying, hey, I'm doing this thing. I'm interested in this. Can we talk? And then basically through that, I don't know whether he got more than one offer, but he definitely got at least one offer that he's very happy with. I guess today we'll be talking more about the other side of getting a postdoc position, which is applying for a fellowship yourself to get some sort of grant money for which you can pay your salary or whatever. So yeah, I guess the reason I invited you to talk about this is because I've got 1 year left basically on my PhD. And I guess at some point I have to start thinking about what I'm going to do afterwards.
Yes. One
question will be from when should I start doing that? But that's maybe a question for later. But yeah, so it's definitely something on my mind. And you already had on your website, I think you had a statement like, if you ever want to know anything about like these fellowship applications, just send me an email or something like that.
I think so.
Yes, I did that. And so I guess today we're talking about that. And to maybe set the scene a little bit, I guess the idea is that this is also, that this is generally useful for people considering applying for postdoc fellowships. But of course, your experiences are somewhat specific, so we'll kind of use those because those the best. And you were awarded the Sir Henry Wellcome Fellowship or postdoc fellowship, which I think is probably the best fellowship from the UK to get. Is that fair to say? Or...
There are very few of them at the postdoc level, so
it looks very cool from the outset, at least.
Yeah, no, it was very good. It was very good.
Yeah,
I was very happy to get it.
So yeah, I guess we'll kind of be using that as an example. At the same time, I can maybe ask some questions that relate to my position, so maybe we can get like a bit of a example, counterexample, or kind of just thinking through.
Sounds good.
So to maybe get like a I was just curious about this. This will probably lead to the first topic, which is you have the sentence I referred to earlier. There's another one you have on your website, which is right on the front page, which is, please feel free to get in touch if you'd like to talk about anything research related, whether it's science or career advice. Reaching out to random scientists can be intimidating for junior students /researchers, particularly if you're from a background that's underrepresented in academia. I want to make it clear here that I'll always welcome this. I can be reached here. Sorry, I can't read. Anyway, so you have the statement on your website, and I was just curious, is there a story behind that, or why did you specifically put that like so, like there's a website that's like, hey, I'm Toby, I'm a postdoc, blah, blah, blah. I do this there, and then there's kind of the statement. So I'm just curious, like, is there a story behind that, or are you just nice?
That actually came about what year are we on now? It came about in 2020 when obviously, there was a lot of stuff going on in the world generally about racism and things like that around the time of the Black Lives Matter protests. And on Twitter, there were a lot of people kind of highlighting various kind of inequalities that exist in academia, and people talking about what could we do to try and improve the level of equity that's out there in our field. And I mean, one thing that I realized is that particularly if you're someone who is from any kind of background that's not well represented in science, it does feel a bit awkward to just reach out to scientists who, look like they're very well respected and professional and experienced and potentially world famous, and ask them for advice. And so I thought, one thing I could do to help that in my little small way is just to put a statement on the website that explicitly says, I don't mind if you email me. Because I mean, I'm not from such a background, but I remember even myself as an undergrad or master's student, emailing prospective PhD supervisors or anything was terrifying because there are people who, you've read their papers and you're like, why would they even have the time to respond to me? And so then you just often don't end up doing it, when in reality, they'd probably be quite happy to hear from you. So I thought, make that explicit.
Okay. Yeah. I mean, I agree with that. I'm also I'm not sure I'm in any minority. I guess I'm always an immigrant because I'm from several countries, but apart from that, I basically have no, I'm in no sense of minority. But I remember also just in second year, wanting to get research experience and just asking someone who was like a lecturer or a senior lecturer where I was studying, and just asking them hey, can I help out? just doing that was terrifying.
Yeah.
And you stand in front of the office and go oh God, what am I doing? They're just gonna throw me out. And then of course they don't.
Exactly. Yeah. So yeah. It's nice, I think, to make that very clear up front for people, and then.
Yeah. Has anyone taken you up on the offer, or?
I think I've had a couple of emails actually. But I mean, myself, I'm not a world famous professor of anything. I don't have people begging me to come and work in my lab because my lab doesn't exist. I was just curious because sometimes these offers can be. I think often these offers just aren't taken up, right? Sometimes you have even when people do that, it can still be intimidating to ask. Oh, absolutely, yeah. It's not going to solve all problems, but it's certainly a step in the right direction, I think. Okay, cool. Yeah, I was just curious. I guess in terms of structure for this conversation, you have written 2 blog posts on your website. I have. One called How to Apply for a Postdoctoral Fellowship in 10 Easy Steps. And I like that they're easy. That makes it nice. And the second is called How to Survive a Fellowship Interview. So I guess we can probably just use that as a structure because I guess it's kind of the order that makes most sense. And, yeah, that sounds good. Kind of expand on it because I guess the nice thing of your blog post is that it's fairly short. Each step is, a brief summary of kind of what goes on in each step. Yeah. That of course also means it might be nice to have a bit more context, a few more examples, that kind of stuff. So the first step you have is called Decide Whether the Fellowship Route is for you. And I thought we'd start with a text message exchange that you put in there. Oh, God. Yeah. So I'm assuming you're the green person. I am the green person. I won't reveal who the other person is. Yeah. You said, I was looking at Wellcome Trust fellowships yesterday. All the previous awardees have CVs that make me want to cry. They all seem to have worked at the greatest labs in the world and have had 10 plus publications by the end of their PhDs. To which an unnamed person responded, Jesus Christ, full stop, end of message. Which I think is great because it first suggests that Jesus Christ is the answer to your problems. And also I think is very representative of especially the fellowship that you got. Yeah, absolutely. So I don't want to, I feel like I've been talking a bit too much already, but I thought I'd like to just expand slightly on this. All previous awardees have CVs that make you want to cry. So when I first heard about this, the Henry Wellcome thing, I think I heard it in the context of Steve Fleming, who is now a professor at UCL. I'm not exactly sure what his exact profession is, but he has the kind of CV where you want to compare yours. If you compare yours side to side, there's just no point at which you could compete. Yeah, it's you'll never come out that feeling very good about yourself. Cambridge and had a first, and then got into the UCL Wellcome Trust PhD, which is I think the most competitive PhD program in the UK for neuroscience. Yeah, had a science publication, worked in Ray Dolan's lab. I think so. Was it? Or I think I don't know if it's between multiple labs, but he certainly worked with Ray at some point. And at some point you go okay, there's just no point I compete with this here, and how are you supposed to be better than this? And then I heard of Demis Hassabis, who was a child prodigy in chess, and he finished school at 16, and then to bridge the time to university, he created Roller Coaster Tycoon. Yeah, one of the very successful. As you do, and then. Yeah, got a first from Cambridge. It's just very ridiculously impressive. Yeah, absolutely. And so now I'm trying to make a transition without insulting you. No, please do. Okay. Because I think the nice thing about yours is you have, obviously an impressive CV, but
it seems relatable.
Yeah.
It's not like at every point you go, oh, they maxed out of how impressive that step is. Obviously you didn't, sit around for a few years and then walked up to the Wellcome Trust and said, hey, can you give me money? But I think the nice thing is that, I guess for people who don't at every step of their academic career have basically maxed out what you can achieve. I think you're an example of someone who's more realistic in that sense and still got it. So,
I mean, I think the reason, like, you see those people and remember them because they have excelled in every single way they possibly can, and deservedly so. I mean, they're brilliant scientists.
It's definitely not a criticism.
You can't argue with that at all. But then you kind of ignore the people who also get these fellowships and maybe don't have papers in science or nature or whatever. And I mean, there are also people out there who you obviously don't know about who have the papers in science and nature and these ridiculous CVs who don't get these fellowships. I've met them. I know they exist. So I think we end up with this very biased view that you have to be one of those people. And it's just not the truth at all. Those people obviously get these things, but so do a lot of people who are more, who aren't superstars in the kind of typical sense we think of in science.
Yeah. And maybe one question I had here is then basically, why did you apply for it then? Because it seems like you had a, good or very good CV. And, the reason we mentioned CVs is because you have these committees have to base their decision on something.
Unfortunately.
And if lots of good people apply at some point, you just end up deciding on somewhat random topics like where someone went or, general impressions. So I was just curious, like when you write like here that it seemed like everyone else was so much better than you, who got awarded the thing. Well, why did you apply then? Or how did? What was your thought process like at the?
It's a long time ago, but I think so. One thing was that I'd seen those people, but I'd obviously seen other people, obviously who didn't have, like I said, papers in science or whatever, and had still been successful. I'd also been to a session at my university where they'd kind of given us a bit of detail about what panels are looking for and these things, and that I think made it seem like a more realistic goal because they've made it clear that you don't need the most impressive CV in the world. There are other things that you'll be judged on, and so I think it ultimately became clear to me that I was in a position where I would have a relatively decent chance as far as my CV went, and so then I was someone who valued independence and thought I would really enjoy being able to kind of drive my own research in the way that a fellowship allows you to do. So I thought, why not give it a go? At worst, I don't get it and I've wasted a little bit of time, but it just seemed like it was worth a try at least.
Yeah, so I guess in step one, deciding where the fellowship route is for you, and you touched on it, one of the criteria for you was that you liked the independence, and that kind of thing. So I'm just curious, who is the fellowship for and who should maybe... assuming you want to do research and say in academia, who is a fellowship for, or who should maybe, not because they're not good or anything, but just because of whatever reason, for whom might, for example, applying for a position in someone's lab where the PI got funding be more appropriate for?
Yeah, so obviously, as you mentioned, you was kind of assuming that you do want to focus on research and in academia as well. If you care more about teaching, then a fellowship obviously wouldn't be the best approach. I know some people just find that they would rather have more kind of guided training for their postdoctoral years, in a way that you don't get so much with a fellowship where more of the responsibility is on you. So basically, if you have a fellowship, you do work in people's labs, but the idea is that you are the one who's coming up with the research questions and identifying the places to work. And essentially you're responsible for leading the direction of that research as well as the day to day. And so you don't necessarily have that kind of more hands-on guidance through your research career that you get from a standard postdoctoral position. You don't have someone telling you, okay, here's a research question that I think we should investigate. Here is how I think we should do it. And,
go do it.
Yeah, exactly. Which can be valuable and which I know some people definitely kind of prefer that approach. So it's not that, one's right or one's wrong. It's very much whether you would rather have that independence or have that more kind of guided route through your postdoc.
Yeah, that's one thing I always thought about, because it seems to me that I've kind of found something I want to do. and that obviously I'm combining elements that are already there, but the thing that I exactly want to do, I don't see anyone really doing. So it seems to me that for that kind of thing, a fellowship might be, if I were to get one, that would be a good idea. Because I could kind of, go to person A who's doing something and person B who's doing something and kind of combine them.
I mean, that's exactly the sort of thing that they're great for. It does depend on, also, I guess, like you kind of hinted at there, having your own research idea as well. If you come up with your PhD just thinking like, I'm vaguely interested in this, but I don't really know exactly how I want to do it, then, there's no point in applying for a fellowship, because you wouldn't have a proposal to put up in front of the committee in the first place. But if it is that, you've identified this problem and there's not necessarily anyone working on that as a whole, then that's a perfect opportunity to try and get some funding to do it yourself.
So do you remember how you developed your idea? Like, was it like clear from you from the beginning, like, oh, I have this thing I want to do? Or was it more, you heard about fellowships that you could do your own thing, and then you think like, well, what could I do? Or kind of what was because I think if I remember correctly, your PhD seems slightly different from what you did in your fellowship, right? And can you maybe like very briefly summarize what you did in your PhD and fellowship?
My PhD was quite different. So my PhD was basically structural and neurochemical imaging and neuroimaging in people with depression and bipolar disorder. And then in my fellowship, I went on to look at kind of computational modeling, mostly of behavior, with a bit of imaging as well, focused on anxiety. So there was quite a change. I'd never done any kind of computational modeling or anything in my life before. But I'd learned a bit about it, enough that I could put together a proposal.
Yeah, I guess it's not like a complete 180, right? Because you were still doing neuroimaging and psychiatry.
Yeah, it's the sort of thing where I think if I'd been proposing to do it without any support and training, without working with people who were experts in that field, anyone would have laughed at the idea. But with the support provided by the fellowship, then it kind of made it a bit more realistic, and I think a possibility when it wouldn't have been otherwise.
So how did you go from one to the other?
I'd been getting into the kind of computational psychiatry. Essentially, just I'd been to the course run at UCL, and I've been reading these papers and talking to people about it, and I found it interesting, and I thought it was something that I wanted to pursue a bit further. And so at the same time as learning that fellowships were a thing and maybe I could apply, I was getting into these ideas and sort of coming up with hypotheses that I thought I wanted to test. And so I bounced these off people who knew more than me to see whether they were reasonable, and eventually kind of managed to come up with an idea for a project.
So this was still people like within your, people you're working with, or were you already asking, people who might supervise you for the postdoc or,
So initially I was just kind of chatting to people who I knew, who like other PhD students and postdocs, where I was doing my PhD, just because I very much wanted to, someone to just say, okay, you're not being completely stupid. This seemed reasonable, because I, know all the time. And I think I talked to a couple of people I knew who were a bit more senior and had fellowships themselves. And so, then once I did that, then it was kind of moving on to finding who I wanted to work with and talking to them about it.
Okay, cool. So I guess by now people will probably roughly know whether fellowship might be for them or not.
Hopefully.
Who've been listening to this.
I'd also say though, like, again, don't doubt yourself. I think it's worth applying for these things, even if you genuinely believe you don't have a particularly good shot, because it does help you kind of form ideas for your future research, and it helps you make connections with people as well. So it's not, even if you don't get it, it's really not wasted time.
I guess the point maybe is also that you think you have something you want to do rather than you think you've got the brilliant idea that the field needs and that's the best thing that ever, right? It's more about like, how much independence do you want in the next position, basically, right? That's
exactly.
Kind of okay. So step 2, think of a rough project idea. I guess so I had should maybe finish one thought before I start the second. So step 2 is think of a rough project idea, and I guess how closely this relates to your previous research really depends on the scheme, I would imagine. So I recently saw some sort of Word document that I guess the Wellcome Trust gave out, because they've, for this Henry Wellcome Fellowship, because they had like 4 completely different examples of like, one person wanted to continue more or less doing what they did. Someone else wanted to like go from like, I don't know, humans to animal physiology or something and needed completely new training. One person, whereas I'm assuming there's probably some fellowships that are much more closer to like, show me that what you did before and how you're going to continue that. But
I think it will depend on the funder and the scheme. Some funders are generally more risk averse generally and will be less happy to entrust you with something you've never done before, whereas like the Wellcome Trust are generally quite happy for you to go and do something new as long as you're well supported in doing it.
Yeah. And I guess also like right now we're still talking about not writing the proposal, but it's kind of just having an idea of what you want to do. Yeah. So you can then steps 3 and 4 are find a fellowships scheme and identify potential sponsors and talk to them. So I guess finding a fellowship scheme seems like a pretty obvious step. Although one thing I always find surprising is how difficult sometimes it is to find funding opportunities that are already out there.
Yes.
Do you have any advice for? Is that you think there'd be like a central database, right? But there seems to be lots of like schemes where sometimes there's like a small thing here or
someone has made a database that I've seen on Twitter before. So there is. So I don't. We'll have to find it, but there is a database out there specifically of postdoctoral fellowships all around the world as well. Otherwise, aside from just kind of Googling yourself, most universities will have some sort of research funding office who will be able to direct you to relevant schemes. Generally, they have grants officers who know what's out there and what you could apply for. With postdoctoral fellowship specifically, the opportunities are relatively limited. So, for example, in the UK, the Wellcome Trust have a postdoctoral fellowship and then a more senior one. But like the Medical Research Council don't have the same equivalent of that kind of postdoctoral fellowship. There are some sort of things going on there, but not the same fellowship as the Wellcome Trust, where you literally get given your own money for 5 years and get to do your own thing. Yeah. I think many funding agencies are not quite so happy to give out a load of money to someone who's just finished their PhD as they might be someone who's more senior. Unfortunately.
Yeah, I mean, I guess maybe finding a fellowship scheme is also part of the people you'll be working with, the potential sponsors or supervisors or whatever you want to call them, because I guess they'll all be more aware of schemes in their country, etc.
Yes,
because I think that's a huge difference, right? Like for example, in Europe, the Marie Curie thing is a fairly big one. If you're changing countries, I think. I think Germany, for example, has a fairly large exchange fellowship scheme from the like German foreign, I don't know what it was called, the DRD. Okay. So I think like these are probably really specific to where you're from, where you did your PhD, where your next supervisor, whatever is, and
they all have their own eligibility criteria as well that you need to be aware of in terms of potentially your nationality or where you've done your PhD.
Exactly.
So it's not necessarily straightforward. These things do require a little bit of work to figure out, unfortunately.
Yeah, but I think the good thing is also that there are often more schemes than one might think. Just because they're not, it's not as obvious as you have the Wellcome Trust and they have one scheme. It's like you have all these other things. Yeah, I mean, like one really random example. So this is just from my master's, so it's slightly different, but the principle is still the same. So I did the dual master. What's it called? Dual masters in brain and mind sciences. That's 1 year at UCL and 1 year in Paris.
Oh yeah,
and so I, by pure chance, happened to live with someone who was French in London. So I was in London and I happened to be living with her, and she had applied for a scholarship from the British Embassy for French people to come over, because there is this Entente Cordiale scholarship that was set up like 50 years ago or something for postdoctoral students from the UK to go to France and France to go to the UK. I applied only because I was living with someone who happened to be from the other direction. I even found out about this and I applied and got it, right? And I think one of the reasons I got it is because no one knows about it.
No, there are loads of these like relatively small pots of money out there that can fund these sorts of things. But they're often a bit hard to find unless you know what it's about.
I'm glad because, otherwise good people would have applied and I might have not gotten it. But still, it's just, Anyway, so I guess it seems to me like one of the biggest steps here is finding people who will sponsor you for your fellowship, right?
Yes.
I say that as if I had that thought myself, but I realized the first line is a fairly crucial step is finding sponsors. So yes. I guess I'm just plagiarizing you here. But so how do you go about doing that? I mean, is maybe how was it in your case? Maybe let's start there.
Okay.
I mean, I guess Ray Dolan is always an obvious idea if you want to get fellowship sponsoring. But
so, in my case, I spoke to a couple of people because I hadn't worked in this field before. I didn't really know I knew who some names were, but I didn't know who would be best to work with. So I spoke to a couple of people I knew about this and got some recommendations. And it seemed like, the Max Planck Center at UCL was the best place to be. And so I actually reached out to my other sponsor first, Peter Dayan. Partly
I didn't realize he was one of your sponsors.
Yeah, sorry, it was him and Ray Dolan and Dominic Bach.
In London, but you were working with Dean Mobbs at Caltech, right?
Yeah, things changed.
Oh, okay.
It's complicated, but things changed as they often do throughout the fellowship. But I'd reached out to Peter partly because he really is one of the most respected kind of computational neuroscientists in the world, and I kind of thought, if I'm proposing something that's completely stupid, I'd rather kind of go to him directly and have him tell me that than sort of get excited that this is going to be a thing and then later have him tell me I'm an idiot. But no, thankfully he was very supportive, as he always is, and he put me in touch with Ray, and then we ended up kind of putting the proposal together. And Ray invited me to go and give a talk at the Max Planck Center. So I got to meet all the people there, which was tough, but enjoyable as well.
Yeah.
So basically,
just out of curiosity, so I mean, by random chance, I guess I know that Dominic Bach was in Zurich because number one, I actually almost applied for a PhD with him, but then I ended up getting a PhD with one of his former postdocs, Christoph Korn. Yeah. And so how you wanted to go to Zurich, or what was the plan?
Yeah, so that was the original plan. But then, Dominic had warned me in advance, but Dominic ended up moving to the Max Planck Center at UCL.
Yeah, exactly.
And for personal reasons, I wanted to go to America. So the two things kind of combined to make more sense to go elsewhere. And
so then you just had to find someone else, and then
yes, and I mean, I'd always wanted
Dean, or
I always wanted to work with Dean anyway because he's always done really exciting stuff. So it all worked out perfectly. It wasn't my plan, but it worked out very well. But I mean, as much as you propose something very clear and well thought out for the fellowship, many times that is not what you end up doing because things do change, and you can't avoid that.
But so, I mean, I know that these are it might seem like a diversion, but I think this kind of stuff is actually important to know that it seems like from the outside it can seem like when you're doing this, oh no, everything's not working out, but it seems like that you're saying that's just kind of part of applying for fellowships. Or
yeah, it is. Do you mean in terms of how it plays out once you've actually got the thing, or in terms of the application itself?
Okay, so I mean, maybe actually to answer your question with another question is, did this change during so I assume this changed during the application process, or is it more you got the thing awarded, then you realize can't go?
Yeah, it was the latter. So it's after I'd been in doing it for a year or something.
Right.
So
I see. Okay. And then the Wellcome Trust was just fine with you changing?
Yeah, I mean, as long as I could show that I had a plan in place and adequate support, it was okay. It's not, again, it's not an uncommon situation.
I mean, I guess academics move all the time. I mean,
exactly.
I started my PhD in Hamburg and now in Heidelberg, so
these things happen. So yeah,
okay.
I guess I can extend a bit on sort of finding people to work with.
Because exactly. That'd be great.
I think it's going to vary from person to person because it may be that you already know people who you'd like to work with. Where I was kind of switching fields a bit, I didn't have that, those kind of relationships in place. But something that's, I think, quite important to note is that often, particularly for the fellowship I had, but I believe for others as well, you shouldn't be proposing to work with people you've worked with before. So it's generally recommended that you go and find a new lab somewhere so that you're not just basically doing a continuation of your PhD. They want you to be working on new ideas with new people and really taking advantage of the independence you get. I think there's always a concern if you stay at the lab you worked in for your PhD that you'll still be working under your PhD supervisor. You'll be working on the same stuff you've done.
It doesn't sound very independent.
Exactly. So yeah, but I'm aware of some cases where people have got them working with the same supervisor in their PhD, but generally that's not recommended. And even you should go to a different institution. So it's not just moving labs, it's moving.
I mean, the Wellcome Trust even says you should do 2 different ones, right? Like one outside the UK even, right?
Yeah. So I don't know. So they've changed all their fellowship funding schemes now, and I can't remember what the guidance is for the new one. But the one when I applied for the one I had, it was a requirement that you spent at least some time in a different lab. I can't remember whether they said outside the UK or not, but I think it's generally assumed that you would go outside the UK.
Yeah, I guess you can do independent work with your PhD supervisor, but yeah, it does look basically like you, I mean, either you didn't finish what you meant to finish doing your PhD.
Yes, exactly.
Or you're just continuing. Yeah, it just doesn't sound very independent.
Yeah.
Yeah, I'm really wondering about this for me because it seems to me I kind of have, it's a really weird thing where let's just say I work in social neuroscience, or you might call it neuroeconomics or whatever, decision making in social situations. And that uses a bunch of neuroscience, a bunch of psychology, economics.
Yeah.
And I don't even know who I would go to right now. I don't have an obvious, I feel like, I've got my idea that's, somewhat vague, but also somewhat becoming more precise.
Yeah.
I mean, is it just a matter of, contacting people and who you think might be good, and then maybe they say, actually, no, this doesn't really work, but I know this person who might help you out there, or who where there might be a better fit, or I'm just curious, what the process would be.
I mean, you can just email people. It's obviously always going to be better if you have some sort of connection already, because that always helps, unfortunately. But you can just email people, and often people will be quite open to potential fellowship applicants asking them for support. Obviously, because most people are quite nice and want to help out with 30 hero researchers, but also selfishly, if they get a funded postdoc in their lab, that they can't really complain. So there are multiple motivations for people to want to help out. As long as you're
the good thing is also they only get a postdoc if the proposal's good. Yes, yeah. So they only get a good postdoc. Yeah,
I mean, we shouldn't be too cynical. I genuinely believe that most people are doing it, do support people in this because they want to help out and they've been there themselves. You can just email people and ask about these things. As long as you're someone who seems reasonably competent and has some sort of CV, I don't think anyone's just going to kind of shoo you away and tell you to give up or anything like that. People, will be open to talking about it. Even if they can't personally themselves help you out, they may put you on to other people who can.
Yeah, I guess. I mean, I have, related to cynicism, I have one question, which is, maybe this is again some of the selection bias or whatever that you mentioned, but it seems to me that basically everyone who's in that scheme, at least the one you're in, is in one of the very famous labs as a postdoc, right? I mean, you're an example of this yourself, right?
Yeah.
How necessary is that? It seems to me almost when you look at the list of labs or the labs where people do these fellowships in, it can sometimes seem like, why would I even contact someone who's not at a famous university or a famous name? Because it seems like only the only the big names will be selected. So I've had that really difficult. Yeah.
Yeah, there is a certain element of that, which probably isn't how it should be, but sadly that is how it, I think, seems to work. Because, I mean, ultimately, part of what you're being judged on is how well supported you will be in the lab that you're going to. And if that lab has a real track record of producing world-class research over decades, there's no question there at all. If you're choosing to go and work with someone who has been a PI for 1 year and has supervised one PhD student, then there's a bit of a question about whether that person is going to be able to give you the support that you need. So it's not ideal, but I think that is something that plays into it.
Yeah, I mean, I also to maybe not make it, I'm not actually that cynical about it because, obviously, as you said, if you work in Ray Dolan's or Peter Dayan's lab, if they also have chosen you as someone they want to work with,
it
seems like that's you'll probably do well.
Yeah. Yeah. It's also, having their endorsement. And as part of these applications, often you need reference letters of support from those people. And so if you have a world famous neuroscientist saying, yes, this person is great and I want them to work with me, that's not going to do you any harm. But I should say, I know people who've got these things working in less famous labs and, at less well-known universities, and, that's obviously worked for them. So it's not something you necessarily need.
And I wonder also to what extent that's just I don't know exactly what the bias would be. Would this be selection bias? I'm getting confused with my biases. But of course if people think that, then they'll be more likely to contact the big names in the first place.
Yeah.
So there'll be more applicants from those places anyway.
Exactly, yeah. And the other thing that happens is people who are applying with those labs are working with people who have more experience of applying for these kind of grants themselves. And so you get potentially better support and better advice in the application process, and that makes you more likely to get it in the first place. So there's that factor as well.
You'd figure Ray Dolan would know how to write a grant application by now.
Yes. So I think there are multiple reasons. But yeah, I would say work with the person who is the best person to work with. And that, that's ultimately what they should be judging you on is, if you're choosing to work with the people who are the best people to work with, who are going to give you the best kind of training and support, then as long as you can explain that and justify it, I don't think you should encounter any major problems, really.
Yeah. One thing you mentioned that I was kind of aware of it, but not as explicit as you just made it, which is the letters of support from your sponsors or from referees.
Yeah.
What would they write if, they don't maybe know you beforehand? Is it a kind of thing where they would say like, oh, I've seen Toby's publications and they're good publications and his proposal's good? Or what do they write if they don't know you that well yet? Right? Because I can't say the proposal's good because that's what the
yes,
what the grant body is judging.
They can comment on your history of research, and normally before they agree to support you, you will have met them a few times. You may have presented to them. You may have, who knows, you may have met at a conference or something like that. They've probably got some idea of who you are, what you've been doing, and whether they think it's good. And they probably wouldn't be supporting you if they didn't think you're doing good work. So they can comment on your CV. I wouldn't worry too much about it because the people who will be writing these letters of support for you have normally done them before and know what to say.
They also have conflict of interest in writing you good letters.
Absolutely, yes, I know. But I think it's in terms of letters from your sponsors, more of a, just making sure that they are fully committed to supporting you. If you get a letter that's just has inaccuracies or barely says anything, you can assume that maybe that PI has just kind of done this as a formality just because someone told them they had to and aren't really being that supportive. But otherwise, it shouldn't be the sort of thing that's going to make or break your application.
Yeah. Okay. So I guess we're now we're assuming now you've decided that you want to do your own thing in this kind of fellowship. You've had a rough idea. You've contacted sponsors. They seem to think it's a good idea and say they'll support you. So now you actually have to apply, right?
Yes.
Now starts the actual application in that sense. So you have to write a proposal, which I'm assuming is it seems also the way from your blog post that way that the research proposal is the main part of the application itself.
Generally, yes, it would be.
And I'm assuming this will probably really differ between grant schemes. Right?
Yeah, definitely. They'll have all sorts of different requirements in terms of length or things that you need to include. Generally, for a postdoctoral fellowship, they'll be less in depth than they would be for a more senior fellowship. So you might be expected to write something that's actually surprisingly short, given how much money you're asking for.
Yeah.
And
you said 1,500 words, right?
Yeah, that's what mine was, which is...
That's 3 A4 pages in single spaced or something?
Yeah, maybe even less. I can't remember now. But it was very, very little, given how big it seems to you, the project, and the amount of money. But other than that, the applications are generally filled with other kind of random information about, who your sponsor is going to be, who collaborators are going to be, where you're going to be working, whether there are ethical approvals that will be in place, things like that, which are quite, minor things. So the proposal is really the core of it. That's what your work is going to be judged on. in some applications, there'll be other parts where you might have to give like a lay summary or something like that. But generally, the proposal is where it's all at.
Yeah. I was really surprised that it's that short. I guess in this specific scheme, just to highlight that again.
Yeah.
I mean, I guess like I've read like my supervisors, he had like a Emmy Noether grant, which is like a German thing. And that's to have like 3 people work for you also.
Yeah.
So then you really have to outline like what the different projects are. And that's, I don't know, 20 pages long or something like that.
Yes.
Right? It's much more in detail. And you have to actually like outline individual experiments and that kind of stuff.
Yeah.
Did you have to outline experiments? Or, I mean, 1,500 words seems like you...
Yeah. I mean, for me, it was kind of more breaking it down into projects that I'd be working on. So I think it's like, first year and a half, I'll do project 1, second year, I'll do project 2, and then I can't remember the exact timings, but something like that. And so each project wasn't necessarily like a concrete experiment of this is exactly what I'll do. It's more, I'll use these kind of methods to ask these kinds of questions, and this will give me
these. You mean something like I'll develop the behavioral experiment and the computational modeling for this thing in part 1, and part 2 we'll put it in the scanner or something.
Yeah, exactly, that sort of thing. So yeah, it didn't require that much detail. I have seen others for the same scheme that have been a lot more detailed, so it's not necessarily that one approach is right and another is wrong. And obviously then for other schemes, I'm sure there are others out there that will require a lot more detail. So it does definitely depend on the scheme. But the thing that's more important in the proposal is really selling your idea, and explaining why they should be giving you the money, which I think is at least as important, if not more important.
Sorry, as part of the proposal or like in addition?
As part of the proposal.
As part of it.
So throughout the proposal, you'll want to be, you don't want it to be literally just like, I want to answer this question. Here are the experiments I'm going to do it to get these answers. This will tell me this. You really need to explain why it's an important topic and why they should be funding you to do it and why you're going to be working at the best place in the world to do this. So essentially from that proposal, it should be really clear why they should be giving you the money, not just why scientifically it's a good idea.
You had a sentence, I copied it in, I don't know where exactly it's in your blog post, but the sentence is, you have to explain why you're the greatest scientist ever to have lived.
Yes, which is
that's
very
step 7. Okay, yeah. So my question here is, why is Toby the greatest scientist to have ever lived? I mean, you have to answer this, right? So like, what do you... I mean, is it just like, I've published these papers during my PhD or...
Yeah, so actually, generally in the application, there'll be... You probably want to mention a bit about yourself in the proposal as well, but generally in the application, there will be some sort of short statement, short kind of personal statement where you do explain, why you're the best person ever. Which the majority of us, we don't think we're the best person ever. But yeah, it's about explaining, what you've done, like literally the achievements you have, whether you've got papers, awards, any small grants or anything like that presented at conferences, just showing that, you've been doing interesting work that has been well received by others. And so it is both about showing your kind of competence, that you literally have the skills to do it, and also that you're doing stuff that people kind of care about as well.
Right.
They were sort of starting to make some sort of impact on the field.
Right. It's not just I wrote a paper and put it on archive and 3 people have downloaded it, but it's more like people actually care about this a bit. At least, yeah.
And to some extent, this is kind of silly because the fact that things like grants help you get more grants is that doesn't make sense at all. But unfortunately, having those sort of things can help strengthen your application. And it's also, especially for fellowships, explaining why you are the person for that project. So, if you can explain that you've acquired a certain set of skills that make you the right person to do this work, and that, no one else could do it quite as well as you could. And that's always going to be very helpful. Which,
you're smiling again whilst you're saying that because you're too modest to actually believe it, I think. But the thing is also, like, I guess, like the way I think about it is that I just don't think there are many people who have thought of all of these, about these specific topics that I've thought about.
Yeah. And that's
just because some of them seem a bit random and left field. And, I think just many people, for random reasons, if you are interested in some slightly unusual things, then combining them will actually make you the expert on that. Just because there's no one else really.
Yeah. I mean, as long as it culminates into something that's going to be an interesting and achievable research project, then yes, combining different interests that other people don't have, haven't thought of combining is an easy way to make you stand out as the one person to do this.
How did you go about the computational modeling thing if you hadn't done it yet? Did you sell that as like here's a new thing I want to add, or did you feel like you needed to say that you were able to learn it, or how do you go about if you want to learn something new and you haven't done yet, where it might be difficult to say why you're the right person to do it?
So speaking for the ones I know about, most of these postdoctoral fellowships, a core component of them is training. So they are designed to help you acquire some sort of skill that you may not have already. And so in my case, it was very easy to then say, I don't know this computational modeling stuff. I'm going to learn it by working with the best people in the world, through this fellowship. And so I think the combination of, having shown that I can do relatively kind of technical research projects, I guess, previously, and that I'll be working with amazing people, and that I have a project that seems to make sense, I think is probably enough to demonstrate that that's a reasonable training goal and that's something I can achieve. If you have no training goals, if there's nothing you're going to train in, then you're probably not going to get the fellowship because you're kind of lacking one of the key criteria. There's no point in
for this fellowship.
Yeah. There's no point in giving you money to train in something when you don't need training. So yeah, you want to be kind of in the right position, but you need to explain why this fellowship is going to help you kind of finalize your training, make you kind of establish you as the person who can really do all this work, based on that potential that you have to begin with.
Is the phrasing then? I'm the best scientist I've ever lived, but there's this one thing that I don't know,
exactly,
and I'm going to the best people in the world to learn that thing.
Yeah, that's basically it.
Okay.
Yeah.
Okay. Well, I'm glad you're complete now. That must be
yes,
good.
exactly. Not a single skill missing now. That's great.
Yeah. Okay. I guess the idea is saying this is something I'd like to learn, but I will be able to learn it based on these other things I've done.
I think it's also good if you can show that you have a sort of vision for where you're going to be in the future in 5 years' time, and
after
if you
the
can
fellowship, you mean?
Yeah. So if you can say, like in my case, I wanted to be someone who's established the computational underpinnings of anxiety and can start to translate that into clinical settings. I have this clinical knowledge already. I've done neuroimaging already. The one thing I'm lacking is all this expertise in computational modeling. And so this is going to fill that gap. And with all those skills together, by the end of this fellowship, I'll be in a place to be able to really start making a massive impact, which it feels awful to say that is stupid, but yeah, that's
just between us. Are you?
I mean, actually, genuinely slightly more than I would have genuinely thought I would be. So
okay.
It has worked in that I have filled the gaps in my knowledge, and I now have the kind of complete skill set that I felt I needed. So yeah, it did what it was supposed to do. I don't know if I'm going to change the world, but probably not. But
you learned computational modeling, so that's a start.
Yes. Yeah.
Yeah. So for your proposal, right, it said 1,500 words. Not really enough space to go on to detail in terms of what exactly you're going to do.
Yeah.
Did you nevertheless sketch out, already have plans for experiments, either because you just had those ideas or because you created them to write the proposal and make it more realistic or something? Or do you not even need to think about that level at that stage? I'm just curious, sometimes you might need lots of detail to then ignore it and write the bigger picture story.
Yeah. I definitely had more concrete ideas than I put in the proposal. I don't know if they're good ideas because I think I ended up then carrying them out and realizing that I need to change them. But yeah, I thought about it in more depth than it appeared in the proposal. And that also became important when I had to then interview for the thing later, because then they do ask you more detailed questions. But yeah, this was just my kind of approach. And I've definitely, again, seen proposals where people have very well thought out experiments in the proposal, and that also seems to go down well. So there's no right or wrong way to do it, I don't think, and it probably depends on what exactly you're proposing. I think it probably would have perhaps seemed a little bit weird if I'd said that I need to train in computational modeling and then had very clear ideas about exactly how I was going to do that modeling that I don't know how to do.
Yeah, these are the parameters. This is the
exactly, yeah. Whereas if there was a part of the proposal that was more kind of clearly based on what I'd done before, maybe more detail would have been appropriate there. I don't know.
So the next step is, I guess we're still writing the proposal. So now we have to rewrite the proposal, which usually is a slightly longer part than the writing proposal.
Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, I guess this how you go about doing that and getting feedback, I'm assuming will depend on the person writing it and the sponsors and whatever.
Yes.
Right? But again, using you as an example, did you more or less finalize it and give it to your sponsors to check over, or did they like right from the beginning say like just send me a first draft and we'll like form it together, or how did that work?
I think I got it to the point where I thought it was done. And then sent it to my
thanks for the first draft.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, then I mean, actually, it definitely wasn't the sort of thing where it was written jointly. I don't think it should be, because ultimately it should, it's supposed to be your work, and if you have too much input, then later on at the interview, I think it will become apparent that you didn't necessarily write the thing yourself. So yeah, for me, it was very much me writing it and getting feedback, and just kind of going back and forth until things were perfect. And also, it's the sort of thing where, because it's so short, at least you feel like every sentence matters. And so you may well go back and forth over two drafts on just like two sentences somewhere, potentially. And a lot of it is about phrasing, making things sound exciting, which in our ordinary scientific writing, we don't tend to do. But people who've got more experience writing grants are better at doing. And so those are the sort of things where your sponsor, can really help. So yeah, it shouldn't be written literally jointly, but you should definitely have a lot of guidance and input from anyone who will give it to you.
And I'm assuming you asked then colleagues, friends also.
Yes, yeah.
And the thing with 1,500 words it's not a huge burden to ask someone to
exactly.
read it.
No,
it's not like this 20, 30 page thing they have to read.
Yeah, no, I asked a few people to give feedback, and people were more than happy to. And then, I've returned the favour later as well. So it all works out.
It came back to you. Yeah.
It did, yes.
Yeah, I guess I'm finding it slightly difficult. I mean, I guess it's just the nature of trying to make something that's like, why, not just specifically about your thing, to kind of, make this a bit more concrete. But I guess it's a rewriting process, right? You have to sit down and do it. And ideally you want to get started as early as possible, because it's really helpful if you can just leave it for a week and come back to it, and then you'll realize something didn't make sense, which you wouldn't when you've been working on it for 7 days straight. Yeah. I always feel like with papers, when you write them, the best is probably to just let them let them lay for half a year.
Yeah,
it's not really realistic.
I
think
agree.
That would be ideal.
Yeah, and I mean, I think it's also there are sort of two stages of getting feedback as well. There's the writing and there's the science as well. At earlier stages, you probably want to get feedback on the actual projects you're proposing, and then later you want to get feedback on the literal words you're using to describe them. I think also, I don't think we'll come on to this later, but there are things that you need to mention in the proposal that I've not talked about, but which are generally very important, at least for the one I had, and I think are quite important for grants generally. People generally say that you have to refer to the person, the place, and the project, and sometimes also add on the time as well. So the person is you. It's why you are the person to be doing the work, which we've talked about a bit already. The place is why you're going to be doing it at the best place in the world. And why is that place the only place you could possibly go? And why is that going to be the place and sponsors who will give you this exciting training and amazing skills that will propel you to superstardom? And then the project, which is the actual science, of course, which you kind
of should also be in there somewhere.
Yeah, you probably need to be doing decent science. And then sometimes also people talk about the timing, which is why you're doing this now. Why could this not have been done 5-10 years ago?
Right. So timing in terms of not your career stage, but more literally the field.
Exactly. Yeah. Because it's really, it always seems really exciting if it's like, 5 years ago, we didn't have these methods, but now all these exciting advances have happened, which means we can answer these questions in a way we couldn't possibly before.
Well, that helped you, right? With computational.
Yeah. No, exactly.
I guess I guess in a way it had been around for quite a bit already, but I guess the review papers called Computational Psychiatry came out in 2014 and that kind of stuff, right?
And there's the famous rule that there always has to be more reviews in computational psychiatry than empirical papers,
right?
Which I think is now maybe fading away. But yeah, it was, for me that exactly, it was, we didn't have these tools until recently. Now we can use them to answer exciting questions. And, I'm bringing this certain skill set that will allow me to, in combination with the training I'm getting, answer
that just seems like a generic advantage for anyone doing cognitive neuroscience, right?
Well,
Because like the fellowship is like biology, biomedicine, right?
yeah.
It's not just neuroscience, right? Like, I mean, you said somewhere,
Yes.
I think there's 15 to 20 places per half year or something like
Yeah.
that.
Yeah.
But like, of course, there's like people doing cellular, whatever.
Oh, yeah. Yeah.
Right.
Yes.
But it seems like cognitive neuroscience as a whole field is such a, I mean, most fields are quickly developing and new and everything, but I would imagine more so than others.
I don't know. I'm not sure. I think there, I mean, if you think about at the more kind of cellular level and, you know, in animal models, the advent of optogenetics and things like that, which is still relatively recent, has really accelerated work in that area in a way that we've not had anything like that.
Neuropixels.
Yeah, neuropixels. Exactly. Yeah, like we haven't had the same kind of advances in human cognitive neuroscience.
Yeah.
Computational modeling,
unless you're using like the new MEG sensors, I guess that would work. But
yes. But also, you need to be using them for something new as well. It's not just, you know, we're going to do the same old stuff with a new fancy method.
Yeah, fair enough. Yeah.
So yeah, I think there are always going to be advances coming about, hopefully in most fields. If not, I think we're kind of failing as a field. And so if you can identify those advances and jump on them, then that's great. It can result in people doing stuff that's considered trendy, for the sake of it being trendy as much as anything, which I guess isn't a good thing. But equally, I think there's a concern that if you're using methods that have been around for 20 years, why hasn't someone done this before? Maybe it's because it's just not something that's worth doing.
That might be my problem.
Well, I don't like it's silly because that's often not a realistic criticism, but I think that's often how it can be perceived.
No, I think it is a fair criticism. Like, if this is such a great idea and you could have done this ages ago, then why has no one done it? Like, I think it is to some extent a decent criticism, or question at least. And I think like this, you know, this is also something I've thought about. It's like, why hasn't anyone done this? Like, it seems fairly obvious. Like, what's the catch, basically? Right?
Yeah. Yes. And so this is why it can be helpful as well to, you know, get early feedback from people who know about the stuff, because they can tell you why it hasn't been done if there is an obvious reason.
So, because it's a terrible idea. That's why.
Yes, it's better to know that up front if that is the case.
Yeah. Maybe I'll ask someone before I apply. Yeah, I guess step 7, complete the application, and step 8, submit the application seems like fairly straightforward steps, I'd imagine.
Stressful.
Because by that point, you already have your sponsor, your proposal, etc. Right?
Yeah. The only thing that can be difficult in completing the application, well, not the only thing, but one thing that definitely is difficult is if you have to sort out the financial aspects of the proposal.
Right. Like how much money you need for testing or whatever.
So I was very lucky in that the fellowship I had was just a fixed amount, and UCL were very happy for me to basically just cost my salary and then nothing else, and just say, okay, we know how much you're getting anyway, it's fine. But I know even for that, other people have had to do full costings, and for any other grant where it's not a fixed amount, you will have to cost out everything, and that is often a painful process, and can take a little while. And you rely on admin departments who have a lot of other grants to be costing other than yours. So that's something that you need to think about sooner rather than later if it is something you need to do.
So maybe whilst we're on the topic of time, maybe I'll ask the question now. How long ahead should you think about this? For example, I've got a year pretty much exactly left on my contract, and it will pretty much I have to finish in that time.
Yeah.
So am I already 5 years too late? Do I still have half a year? What's kind of when should you start thinking so let's say like I wanted to apply for fellowship, once I've finished here. I don't know whether that's the case, but let's just say I have a year left. Like how, should I already start contacting people or?
It's going to depend on when you want to start the fellowship. If you very much want it to be, I finish this thing and then move on to a fellowship immediately after, and I have no gaps or whatever in between, then you'll have to judge it based on the timing of, the application cycle and everything. Ideally, I think you want to be thinking about it at least like 6 months in advance of the deadline, and potentially have been thinking about ideas for it a little bit in advance of that. Having said that, I know people have applied for these things in like 2 months and it's been fine. I think generally,
as an aside, I've in my life, every single application I think that I planned out didn't work, and almost at least half of the applications I did like in a weekend worked. So I'm not sure what the lesson is from this, but
there's so much randomness in this that there's in some senses it doesn't feel worth putting in like 6 months of effort or anything. But I think it's more in terms of the practicalities of needing to work out a relationship with a sponsor and get them to agree to be involved. And, if that requires you going and giving a talk at their lab, for example, that's going to take a month, potentially more, to get organized. If you need to do costings, you need to probably have that worked out or start working on that, a month or maybe more in advance of the deadline anyway. Getting letters of support from people can take a while. So it's more just giving you the time to kind of relax about those things than anything.
Yeah.
And being able to get more feedback on your ideas and your proposal.
I guess that's the next thing. You can't get much feedback if you've got a day left.
Exactly. Yeah. So the more time, the better. But people get them without spending months on them. So it's not the end of the world if you can't do that.
Yeah. One thing I heard sometime about applying for grants, I think this was general or something like that. You shouldn't really see a grant application per se as just writing a grant application. You should see it as like developing your ideas and reading papers you otherwise might not read, like just doing science basically. So I think in some sense it's also just, working on your ideas. Yeah,
exactly. And, I know people who've kind of put together grants, and even if the grants have got funded, that's kind of turned into a review paper or something like that, because they've had to review so much literature as part of writing the grant that they thought, why not use that?
Yeah.
It's not time wasted at all. It can be part of what you should be doing, I guess, in your job anyway. It's part of research. So it's not a bad thing to spend time on it, even if it doesn't get funded.
Mm-hmm. So you have like step 9 is submitting the application again. I guess this is somewhat but not entirely specific to the.
It was quite specific to that scheme. So I think it's not always the case by any means that you need to.
It's weird. You mentioned at some point, I think like if you go through the numbers, you said something like, very roughly, like half of the people get invited to submit a full application.
Yeah.
Then half of those get invited to the interview, and then half of those get the thing, which means like 1/8 of the applicants roughly get it, which is about 12.5%, right? Very roughly. It's funny, like at first when I heard like half. I thought, that doesn't sound too bad. I've applied to things that seem more competitive than that. But then you also think like, but 10% of people who've like put a lot of effort into this and are probably not the worst PhD students to begin with.
Oh yeah.
Is pretty
Absolutely.
tough.
Yeah, no, the odds are generally not good. And as I said before, a lot of it is just pure randomness that you can't control. One panel may look at you and think you're the perfect applicant. Another panel may look at you and think that you've got no chance, which is completely out of your control. It doesn't matter what you do.
How many did you apply for? Well, did you just apply for this and it worked?
But only because there wasn't really much that appealed to me otherwise in terms of fellowships. I think had I not got this, I would have done a postdoc and maybe looked at other opportunities a bit later. But at the time, this was the only one I was kind of interested in applying for.
I think I'm asking the wrong people here for advice for postdoc applications, because you applied to one fellowship, arguably one of the best ones, and got it. And Matthias basically mailed like 5 people and they got the job. I think I'm asking the people, or is it just can it just be that easy? I don't know.
Again, I went a different route, but I think with standard postdoc positions, I really wouldn't worry too much about getting one at all. Getting one in your dream lab doing exactly what you want to do, that's probably going to be tough. But maintaining employment in an area that you're interested in, I don't think is that tough. I mean, I've also heard from the other side, people recruiting postdocs often find it actually quite tough to find someone to fill the position who is going to be, is going to do a decent job.
I've actually heard the exact same thing from people. Yeah. I mean, the reason I have a PhD position, I think, is because they couldn't find a postdoc to do, who would fit the role. And here we are.
Yeah.
Now I'm not doing the job properly, so that's much of it. I've heard it like from people in, to me it makes sense. Like if you're at like a small university in a small town that no one wants to go to, you'd not be that surprised if it might be difficult to get some. But I've heard from good supervisors in cities or towns or whatever, where you'd think the town itself would attract people.
Oh yeah.
And them just going like, no one good is applying.
Yeah. No.
Well, I had a supervisor who said like, even half of the applicants I get, I don't know whether they know who I am, just from their like application letter. Like it's so generic.
Yeah.
Like, I don't even know whether they've read the ad, basically.
Yeah. So yeah, I really wouldn't worry too much about getting some sort of postdoc. Obviously, the fellowship route is more competitive and more reliant on luck, and so it's always going to be a bit more of a risky option. But also, like, if you do try that and it doesn't work out, you shouldn't feel too bad about yourself, because again, it is largely luck.
Yeah, and I think one thing, I'm assuming this is similar at the postdoc level as it is at the PhD level. I remember, so in our masters, we were like 20 people or something, and all of us were pretty good and applied to, the best PhD programs you can apply for and that kind of stuff, right? And almost all of us got rejected in the first rounds, right?
Yeah.
And not everyone, but like lots of people got rejected for several ones that they really wanted to go to. And now when you look at what they're doing, it's like, that doesn't look any worse. Like, you're still doing a great, like on paper even, it's like, I'm not sure like the thing you got rejected from first was any worse than what you're doing now.
And certainly for the postdoc fellowships, by virtue of having had one, I've then got to, lots of people contact me to ask me to, help with mock interviews or looking over proposals or whatever. And so I know a lot of people who subsequently applied for them. And of all those people, I would not say that the people who haven't got them were any worse to begin with or have done any worse subsequently. The people who've done the fellowships have obviously kind of got to personalize their training a bit more, perhaps go to exciting places and things like that. But in terms of the overall career success, I don't know if it has made a huge difference. And certainly in terms of qualifications and brilliance of the people who've applied and been successful versus unsuccessful, no difference at all. Like, I know so many amazing people who've not got them.
Yeah, so if you are amazing, you're not guaranteed success. If you're not amazing, you might be successful anyway.
Yep.
Yeah.
Yes.
Anyway, so I guess we've now reached the interview stage.
Oh, yes.
The most fun stage of any application process.
Yeah.
And it's so much fun that you wrote an entire blog post about this. So there's one basically for steps, 1 to 10, 10 being the interview, and then there's another one just about step 10.
Yeah.
Maybe I'll start here with something that the Twitter thread I sent you that I'll put a link to this in the description, but I think, so this is something about tenure track job talks, but I think, I'm assuming it applies very much to fellowships also. So this is from a guy called Jonathan Birch, who's an associate professor at LSE. He said, I must have seen more than 40 tenure track job talks by now. Here are some general reflections on what works and what doesn't work. The best job talks start by giving an overview of your emerging research program, then zooming in to an example of your best recent work, then zooming out at the end to lay out future directions. Start and end by generating excitement around your long-term trajectory. The work in the middle should be an example of your best work, not some half-baked, unfinished new thing. Save the unfinished new thing for informal chat. The point is to establish that your wider research program is not bluster. You're already doing excellent work, so the exciting future directions are also credible. For the same reason, it's better if the work in the middle is developing a positive idea, not just saying, Big Shot X says this, but they're wrong, because. Present your ideas. Be the Big Shot X of the future. People in the hiring department will be thinking, why is this work important for the discipline? What is its significance beyond the discipline? What is excellent about it? What is original about it? A great job talk will answer these questions so that no one needs to ask them. And finally, it is hard to get all of this right, of course, but that's mainly because it's hard to develop an exciting and credible research program. The tragic thing is when candidates have done this but don't explain it. You've done the hard bit, now do the easy bit. And I guess this also applies to writing the proposal.
Yes.
But is there, I don't know, this was maybe quite a lot of information, but is there anything there that you think makes particular sense or that you didn't do? Or
if we're thinking about postdoctoral fellowships, it's a little bit simpler because you're not expected to have a whole research program by any means. But certainly in terms of explaining, why this is an exciting project that you're proposing and establishing your credibility, that's definitely a big thing. The difficulty with the interviews that I've generally done for these kinds of fellowships is that you don't really get so much of a chance to explain yourself compared to something like a job talk. It's more people questioning you. And so you have less control about, over what you're saying. Mm-hmm. First, interviews are not common to all fellowships by any means. Plenty of them do not have interviews. In the UK,
really? Okay.
we generally tend to do interviews. I know fellowships in the US often won't do them. And there are various problems with interviews, which it isn't necessarily always the best way of making these decisions, but it is what it is. And when they are done, the format is basically that you will probably do some sort of short presentation, so about 5 minutes, and then the panel will be asking you questions to clarify things about your proposal, or maybe ask you about things that reviewers might have identified in your proposal, basically seeking to verify that, yeah, you have that credibility, that you know your stuff, you can answer their questions, there are no fatal flaws, and also particularly in the case of postdoctoral fellowships, that you are the one who came up with the research proposal, because it is quite possible that, you know, your sponsor may have decided they want some more funding and applied on your behalf for essentially for a postdoc fellowship. Hopefully that's not something that's done very often, but is one function of the interview to check that.
Sorry, yeah, is the just to maybe add / question that, or not add a question to that, is that, I'm assuming right now that by now they've established that the proposal is good. Like, in a way, you don't almost need to defend the proposal per se that much. It's more about is it more about saying, is this person who wrote the proposal and who is good, or are they still do they still want to find out whether the proposal itself is good?
It's going to depend on how they do the assessment procedure. So for some fellowships, the shortlisting will be done prior to getting reviews from experts, and then they'll send it out to review. And so proposal that they've shortlisted may come back from review with quite critical comments. And so then they want to clarify that in the interview. And so then a lot of it will probably focus on the proposal, or maybe the panel members themselves have a particular question about the methods you're using because they use them themselves or something like that, and they want to press you on that a bit further. So it won't necessarily exclude the project. In fact, in some cases, it may be quite heavily emphasizing the project. It really is going to depend on the panel on the day as well. Okay. And there's not necessarily that much consistency across interviews. So I know that for some schemes, they are funders are making interviews a bit more standardized across candidates, so that you will all be asked roughly the same set of questions. But otherwise, yeah, it's kind of up to the panel of the day and what they want to ask you about. It could be anything.
Yeah. Yeah, it's true. I guess like a lot of what we're talking about, I've been like the idiosyncrasies of somehow selecting who's going to be good in the future and how impossible that is, and that is all luck anyway. But I find it so hard, like if you're, like as you said, like it's probably good to have something standardized. But I remember also I had an interview for some PhD scheme at UCL. And they asked, I think they basically had a list of questions asked me, and it just felt so like detached and unpersonal.
Yes.
I was like,
yeah, I know.
Do you not want to like engage with me at all?
Yeah, that's one problem with that approach.
Yeah.
But so the interview is generally a horrible experience. I think, as I said in that blog post, I don't think many people find them particularly enjoyable, because you are faced with a huge number of potentially of scary people asking you about all the flaws in your research and in yourself as well, potentially. So it's not fun, but it's something that you just kind of need to manage somehow. And
And I guess some of the things you mentioned is also that some things seem worse than they are. For example, I think you mentioned, you often have these fairly large panels. I think for yours, you said 15 to 20 people, and only like 3 people will be paying attention. The others will be looking at their laptop or whatever. But I think often they set it up, right? They'll have like one day where they'll do most of the people or whatever. So not everyone is there for every person, right? So they'll just, they're not really disinterested. It's just that not their time to really be interested.
Of course. So the whole thing, I think, does just the whole setup makes it seem a lot worse than it actually is. But I should say also, like, generally, when I've done these interviews, generally the panel are supportive and do want you to do well. They're not out to get you really. They're not trying to make you feel uncomfortable. But, it's hard to avoid feeling uncomfortable in that sort of situation.
And I guess often for them, you might also have been like the 10th person who came in that day. So they've been sitting there for 5 hours or whatever.
Yeah, or they're like about to go and have lunch. And
I mean, that's another randomness thing, right? That's definitely going to affect.
Exactly.
Like, if you're the first person or second person of the day, I think you've got better chances than
I wonder whether they've looked at the statistics of this. I don't know. You'd hope there wouldn't be any.
I'd be surprised though, right? Like at some point you're just like, I mean, we once had it with flatmates, right? After the third person, everything just starts to like in your mind, just like, you start losing like the contours of who's coming and everyone,
Yeah, I think there are probably procedures in place to try and limit those effects anyway, I'd hope.
I guess maybe that's why they have multiple people doing it anyway.
Yes.
Yeah. Is there any advice other than the generic stuff like practice your talk, be understandable to many people and not just the experts?
Probably. The frustrating thing for me is that like I feel like I'm relatively good at giving advice for interviews. I'm terrible at following myself.
Well, that's fine as long as the advice is good.
So one of the reasons why though is that it's very difficult to know how you present yourself, and so one piece of advice that I would always give is to record yourself giving your presentation, right, and record yourself if you have some sort of mock interview that you do with colleagues or whatever, because you will pick up on things that you're doing that you're not otherwise aware of. You'll pick up on the fact that you're speaking far too fast and you can't actually understand what you're saying, or that you're saying like in between every other word. So yeah, that is a very helpful thing to do. And not just for interviews, also just for presentations generally. If you give a talk, it's quite embarrassing and horrible, but also quite helpful to record yourself and listen back to it before you do it for real.
As someone who's done this 50 times now on my podcast,
yes.
I would recommend maybe not doing this right before the interview for the first time, because you'll be horrified at how stupid and dumb and whatever you sound. Maybe do this like a few times before so you kind of get used to it.
Yes.
Because you're definitely going to have an initial shock of just your own voice. And
yeah, it's horrible listening to yourself. Absolutely.
Yeah, although you do get used to it. That's the good thing. I mean, I've gotten used to it by now, so I'm not... not necessarily that I think I sound the smartest all the time, but I'm not like cringing every time I speak on the podcast and I edit.
That's good.
It's a nice development. Yeah. I don't know whether it's like just numbing of sensation and pain or or what it is, but yeah, maybe don't do this the day before the interview, because then you'll just be even more self-conscious.
Absolutely, yeah. I think the other thing to say is to take advantage of all the help you can get. Generally, people will be quite happy to help you out with practicing your interview and presentation and things like that. And that kind of support is extremely valuable, particularly if it's support from people who have been interviewed themselves or have sat on panels.
Everyone go mail Toby.
Yeah.
I know you've panels, you said, sorry. But still, you've been in the interview.
Yeah, I've sat on mock panels for enough people at this point. And I know people find that the mock interviews they do in advance are worse than the real thing. So if you can find some particularly nasty mock interviewers, that's always helpful.
I once had someone in our masters, she invited 3 people to give like a PhD, like application talk or whatever. And she specifically invited me because she said, I need an arsehole there. So that was nice.
It's like,
I can be critical.
It's really good to be able to practice, answering stuff under pressure, because then if you do go into the interview and you get pressure on you to answer a specific question about your methods that you're not that you wouldn't otherwise be competent about answering, you're ready for that.
But I guess practice and recording of that. The recording is actually funny that I hadn't even thought of that, but that's a very good idea.
It's very helpful. But otherwise, I think the biggest things that I think I've seen in the mock interviews I've done with people that cause problems are, number one, just people having problems with anxiety, which is one reason, as someone who studies anxiety, I don't think interviews are necessarily the best way to award these things, because some people just kind of fall to pieces in that situation, and that's, you can't really blame them for that. But practice
it's not
can help with
indicative
that.
Of how they do research.
Exactly. No, not in the slightest. So practice can help with that, but that is something to be aware of. And the other thing is, some people are just not so good at answering questions in a brief, direct manner. So you don't want to be waffling on for 5 minutes in response to every question. You want to just very neatly and directly answer the question that's been asked of you. And that can take a bit of practice to get a hang of. And it's also another thing where it's good to record yourself, because you often don't know that you're waffling until you've heard it back.
Absolutely, yeah. I've had to do this in minor things where, I had to, for PhD applications or whatever, do something that's like talk for 5 minutes. And then you do, yeah, I've got this. And then you do like a last rehearsal and you realize you're like 11 minutes long or something.
Yeah.
Like, oh God. Yeah.
Yep.
So, yeah. I also like your last point of advice, which is read your application.
Yes.
Because I think it's very easy to forget what you actually wrote in the thing. And
absolutely. Yeah. Because often, there'll be quite a gap between you writing it and being interviewed. So you need to remember what it is you're actually proposing to do. And also, if you put a sentence saying you're going to do a specific thing and you forget about that and then they pick up on it and ask you about it, you can't just,
it's like, oh yeah, that's right.
You don't know what you're doing.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, I guess it's particularly difficult if you like develop your ideas and it slightly changes or something.
Yeah.
Then you start, your new stuff becomes what you think you wrote. Those are probably the main things, right?
I think so. I mean, you could probably do a whole hour and a half on just interview skills and stuff.
On all sorts of things, yeah. I mean, I guess this is similar to your blog post, more like an overview.
As a brief interview, I think we've covered the key parts. Thankfully, interviews are not necessary for all fellowships, which is a good thing, definitely.
Exactly. Yeah, I mean, one thing I'd just like to... I guess we kind of already talked about this in the beginning, but that's something that I feel like it might still be the thing that might be on people's mind the most. It's just the question of, or at least it's still on my mind, is the question of like, am I even qualified to apply to this? Because, for example, like when I think about, like where will I be in a year, right?
Yeah.
It's like, okay, I've got one publication in Royal Society of Open Science, which is, it's a good publication, but no one's going to go, oh, wow, you got into that journal, right? It's kind of like it's one of those, I think, and I'll have another one like that probably. Two of those kind of just show like, okay, you can write a paper, you can take, do every part of an experiment and that kind of stuff, publication process. But it's, for example, in my case, unlikely I'll have anything that's really gonna, by the point I apply, let's say I apply like in 9 months or something, right? I don't think there's going to be anything like that on my CV that really makes people pay particular attention to my publication list, right? And maybe just this one question: did you already have that when you applied? Because I never in terms of exactly publications when you applied, when the publications were accepted, and that kind of stuff.
Yeah, I somehow managed to get out a fair few publications during my PhD. Although, I mean, a couple of the ones I had in sort of major journals were meta-analyses, so it wasn't data I collected myself or anything. So yeah, like CV wise, I would say, I mean, it's hard to judge, but I think, I was in a reasonably strong position. But I certainly know people who've got these things with fellowships more like yours, with CVs more like yours. And it's not just about having flashy papers in flashy journals. This is also another thing that will definitely very much vary from country to country as well. I know funders in the UK, panel members and reviewers are explicitly told you are not allowed to mention journal names, impact factors, things like that, and any comment related to that will be discounted. That kind of prestige is still probably going to impact their assessment.
You still see it though. It's like, where is it?
You still see it, and it will still impact how they feel about you, which is a shame. But I believe more in America, you get that a lot more explicitly. So it depends on where you're coming from. But I think it's as much as anything, it's kind of showing that you've had some level of independent thought, that you've done, you have the kind of practical research skills. And so if you have a paper where you can say, I had this idea, I carried out this project to test this hypothesis I was able to use all these methods to do it that I've trained in during my PhD, and it produced this really cool output, then that's great. It doesn't matter that it was published in a journal that is not Science or Nature. So it's as much kind of what you're showing with those publications as where they're published or whether the results are significant even. I get the feeling at least that reviewers and panels are getting a bit more, a bit less strict about wanting publications in top tier journals all the time. So,
I mean, it's one of those weird things where, I'd feel stupid not applying, right? Just because that's the case.
Oh yeah.
But it is something like in the back of my mind, like, it's like,
but
would have been better if I finished the projects I started in year one, and not like let it lie for 3 years.
PhD is never going to plan. And that's, that's unavoidable. But I mean, I would say if you don't have any publications, then it's probably going to be tough because it's hard for the people judging your application to judge whether, you're capable of producing research output. If you have publications, one or two, that should be enough to show that you can do research.
I guess also publications here does not necessarily mean published, right? Like I remember when I talked to Matthias Stangl, he mentioned, for example, that he had like some stuff from before, but from his actual PhD, he didn't have anything published when he contacted the people yet. But he could say like, oh, we've got this, for example, this was then in Current Biology or something like that. It's under review, right? Yeah. Like that's, of course, also much more than...
Yes, definitely. And nowadays with preprints, it's a lot easier to demonstrate that you've produced something, even if it's not actually published. And, generally you can put those in your application and they can be counted as part of your CV. So you don't necessarily have to have things actually published. So I would always say, if you've got a couple of publications, like one or two, go for it and, it's worth a shot. Yeah.
Yeah, I guess, the thing is also, I'd imagine, it's also a timing question, right? Like when is your paper out or whatever, your preprint out or whatever. And I feel like, maybe I'm not quite there yet, like during my PhD, but then a year afterwards or something, maybe then I can try again and I already have like this basis of the application.
Yeah.
And,
it's often the case that waiting a year will put you in a much stronger position because you'll have new stuff out. So in that case, it's probably worth doing it. It's going to be up to each person to decide when they think is the right time. But what you don't want to do is be constantly caught in the cycle of being, feeling like, okay, I'll wait next year I'll have a new paper out. Yeah. Oh, but then the year after
I got rejected.
Paper. Yeah.
Or whatever.
Yeah. So I don't wait too long. But
I guess like everything, just give it a go and see.
The easiest way to not get it is to not apply.
Yeah. That's probably going to work. Yeah, you're probably not going to get it then.
Yeah, you're already writing yourself out if you don't apply. So,
yeah, we'll see. Okay, well, thank you. I think I'm now perfectly prepared to apply for postdoc fellowships.
I don't think having done the thing, I'm not sure I would. I certainly wouldn't guarantee myself success again because there's so much random chance in it. So you can never be 100% certain that you'll get it in any sense. But
you can try.
Worth a shot. Yeah, exactly.
Okay. Well, thanks.
Thank you.